Hello, guys, gals, and non-binary pals. It's Big Mike, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Coffee with Big Mike, the series where I sit down for a chat with some rather interesting and amazing people over a nice cup of coffee. Joining me today is Rolling Crow, the developer of Goat Hell, Horizon, and most recently SpitFire Paradise. Welcome, Crow, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey there, thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. The pleasure is all mine. So how are you today?
I'm doing alright. It's a nice, not quite toasty night. It's getting pretty chilly already.
Yeah, it's a bit brisk in my part of the world as well, though I live on a mountain, and so it's not very typical of the place as a whole, but it's nice. Now, it's Sunday night in your part of the world, so I have to ask, as a game developer, did you get any gaming done this weekend?
Well, I've actually just gotten into Final Fantasy 14 recently. Just the free trial of this, so I just get in during the off hours since you pretty much can't log on during the peak hours since the expansion just got released.
Oh, wow. And what do you think about it so far?
I think it's pretty fun. It's the first MMO that I really delved into, like, for more than 10 minutes.
Now, can you tell our audience a little bit about yourself?
Well, I just live out here. It's a desert out here, so I'm just more used to most of the year just being super hot. So imagine just punching away, doing either making stuff or just playing stuff in the heat most of the time. It's pretty great. I love shoot 'em ups and rhythm games. That's pretty much all I've made so far, but it's the kind of games I like the most. So I want to try my hand in making those kinds of things.
That makes a lot of sense. Artists tend to depict the things they like, or they tend to create the things they like. Like, for example, a rock musician probably is going to listen to rock as opposed to country or hip hop. If you're going to make a comedy movie, I'm probably sure you're gonna watch comedy movies. No, are you originally from? Sorry.
No, press something.
Are you originally from the desert, or is that like a more recent place?
Not too recent. Like, I was born on the East Coast, but then when I was really young, we moved to the West. So I barely know what snow looks like, pretty much. Maybe unless I went up to the mountains over here.
And was it difficult getting used to the arid climate?
I don't think there really was a getting used to period because it happened when I was so young. So I might as well have just been here this whole time.
No. One thing I like to do with my game developer guests is I like to get to know them as gamers, because game developers are first and foremost gamers themselves. So before we get into talking about your working and about game development, I want to get to know Crow the gamer. Now, what was the first game you've ever played?
First game. I don't know. I'm trying to think of all the consoles we had laying around then, but I think my very earliest game memory at all was like Mortal Kombat Trilogy on like the N64. Not that I knew really what I was doing, but it was there.
Well, I'll be honest with you. I grew up. Well, my first game was Super Mario Bros. But my parents had an NES. But I really came into my own doing the 16-bit era. I was in elementary school, so I grew up doing the Genesis SNES wars. And at the time, fighting games like Mortal Kombat, Street Fighter were all the rage, and I played them. And honestly, I had no idea what I'm doing. And even if I was to play today, I still wouldn't have any idea what I'm doing. Though I do think they're cool. I do think they're a really nice piece of history. I more prefer fighting games like Super Smash Bros., for example.
So like platform fighters and all that.
Yeah, absolutely. Though I will say, I did put a lot of effort into Mugen, if you're familiar with that.
Oh, the creator.
So Yeah, so I love the idea how almost anything can happen there. You can have characters from, even real life, movies, cartoons, anime, video games. And this, I think that's the allure for me, is that really anything can happen there. Um,
Yeah, being able to create your own custom content for, well, you're pretty much just making like stuff for a game that's, could you call it infinite? It's not like there's any real ending. You're just kind of making anything for it to any end.
yep. I do believe that's correct. It is infinite. At least the vanilla is. You can. A lot of people use it to make their own game with, but as it stands, it is infinite. And in fact, if I'm not mistaken, that's what Mugen means, or Mugen means in Japanese. Infinite. Um, and I like developing stuff for it, but I've never really got into character development because it's way out of my league. It's way over my head. But I got into a lot of stage development because it intersected rather nicely with my photography hobby, and it's something nice, something interesting.
Something interesting.
So you like making backgrounds and all that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I have no artistic skills, or at least they're not as good as I like them to be, or as they should be, for game content creation. But I like taking pictures of landscapes and scenery. It works rather nice there. Of course, by the end of the process, whatever picture you've taken looks like it's in like 16-bit era stuff. So it's kind of cool, but it's not as crisp as you'd like it, but yeah, it gets the job done. Um, Now I have to
Yeah.
ask, what is your favorite game, and what's your favorite console?
Oh, my favorite game. I would say that's a tie, like a three-way tie between Resident Evil 4, Dance Dance Revolution, like the whole series, and Metroid Fusion.
You know, that is a very eclectic group of games. Very, very, very eclectic group. And actually, I think that's kind of reflected in your work. You have an eclectic portfolio of games, I think. But we'll get into that later. Um, and now, I know you mentioned you're into shoot 'em ups and rhythm games, but are there any other genres that you're into?
Nothing too heavy these days. It's really just those two. But then the random the random cherry picked thing like Final Fantasy 14 will sometimes show up and take over all my other interests instead of those other two genres.
Now, prior to Final Fantasy 14, were you ever into RPGs?
Mostly like tactical ones, so like things like Fire Emblem or Persona 4.
And if you had to choose a favorite shoot 'em up, which one do you think that would be?
Ooh, crazy hard question now. Uh, Let me see. I'd have to say an arcade game called Mushihime-sama Futari. It's a it's a game from like the I think mid 2000s, and it's that game with like the infamous hardest video game boss ever video with like the huge queen boss with like shooting just purple bullets all over the screen and all that.
Were you ever able to finish the game?
On lower difficulties, like the easier modes, easier versions of the game, but not the version that everyone's seen on that one video.
I've actually recently gotten into some shoot 'em ups myself, a bit more than when I used to. Since I delved into the indie community, I was really surprised as to find out how popular they were. Um, there are a lot of retro shoot 'em ups being made, and also some more newer ones as well. Recently, I've played one. Well, it's an on-rail shooter. I'm not sure if you'd consider it a shoot 'em up per se or a subgenre of shoot 'em up. Um, Very fun game if you're interested in the type of thing. It's called Superstar Shooter 16. I'd highly recommend it. Um, and I would say probably my one of the one of the more memorable shoot 'em ups I've ever played. I think it's called Sexy Paradas, if I'm not mistaken. Um, it's
Oh
been
yeah, Sexy Parodius. Yeah.
I love the whole aesthetic. I'm a huge fan of absurdist comedy. Um, I'm a really huge fan of that type of stuff, and so that really struck a chord with me. Um, now,
Yeah, the whole cute 'em ups are pretty cool. They have a it's pretty much just variety hour the whole time.
I would say if I had to choose my favorite arcade shoot 'em up, I would say probably it would probably be a tie between Bosconian and Galaxian. But I think I like Bosconian more. Um, no,
Oh, never heard of Busconian. I'll have to look it up soon.
no, the ship in Bosconian it looks like the ship in Galaxian. It looks just like it, but instead of you having ships flying at you, you're kind of flying around this map, and there are these space stations you have to blow up. Um, you can either they have like six guns, and they also have a middle. Now you can destroy it by shooting the six guns, or you can destroy it by blowing up the middle. And there's like every stage has at least four, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And in order to clear a stage, you have to destroy all four. But at the same time, you have to avoid asteroids. The space stations are shooting at you. There are numerous enemy ships coming at you, and there's space mines you have to avoid. And it's pretty cool. I mean, especially considering the generation it was in. Um, no,
Yeah, I'm looking at it now. It's pretty interesting seeing something that lets you move in more than like 2 degrees or two directions, or isn't just fixed scrolling the entire time since you get to scroll it yourself.
I will say there is no time limit per se, but after a certain point, these squads of ships will come out at you. So you can't really take your time. I mean, you can take your time a bit, but after a certain time, you have like a radar. It hit like code red or something of that nature, and it gets much more intense to say the least. Now, was there ever a game that you played that made you want to be a game developer?
Huh, that one was Doom, which I actually forgot to put on a four-way tie for my favorite games, like the original Doom.
And what do you think it was about Doom that made you want to be a developer?
It was something about it was just fascinating to play. Like this was back when I had like a super potato computer, and this was even like in the mid 2000s when I should be able to like play like early Steam games and all that. But no, uh, everything stutters on that old computer that I had. So just playing Doom on like an old source port, it it opens up like modding capability really easily, and then you get it if you learn the language. It's pretty simple to learn, or not really simple to learn, but it's easy to get into, and just to get instant satisfaction just seeing whatever you made getting suddenly put into the game. It's pretty cool to see.
Unfortunately, I've never really gave Doom a shot. But I will say I do have a great deal of respect for the community, especially a lot of the work they've done, a lot of the feats they were able to pull off. Like I remember once reading that there was someone who was actually able to port Doom to like a scanning gun that you would see in a retail store, and I was like, oh wow, that's something, and that's something.
Yeah, the man Doom runs on everything.
Did you ever play Wolfenstein?
Like a little bit just to I think I found out about it like after I started trying to play Doom, but then realized every map is just well, going from like Doom to Wolfenstein, it feels like you're suddenly downgraded, since instead of like the big angular maps of big like organic maps of Doom, you're suddenly stuck in a very boxy kind of maze for Wolfenstein, and then all three of your weapons are just straight upgrades to each other that just do nothing but shoot more bullets than the last.
I've never had a chance to play that one myself either, but one of my good friends in university, he was really, really into it, and he was really into mods and stuff. Um, and Now to kind of switch gears a bit and to kind of start jumping into the meat and potatoes of the conversation. How did you get into game development?
Well, it was still Doom that did it because it made me interested in modding it at all. But then, even though there was like a pretty huge lull in the years before between modding Doom and then in the meantime eventually learning how to use Unity. Well, I guess just that whole time, even though maybe I had like ideas brewing, I usually didn't act on them. But that interest stayed that whole time. So eventually, I just picked up Unity way years later after I stopped modding for Doom, just try it out.
And would you say it was something more of a hobby for you, or was game development or programming something you studied?
Well, programming and studying, but I was studied in university, but it's nothing for like specifically for game development or anything. But I just picked up Unity just to try it out for a little. Actually, dropped it for a while again because I didn't really decide to go through it for some reason. But interestingly enough, there's almost at the end of my university, we had a sort of like capstone-ish project, and our group wanted to make a rhythm game in Unity. So that suddenly catapulted me into wanting to do Unity, and guess what? It's on a genre that I like already, so cool.
I see. My next question was going to be like, why Unity? Like, why not Unreal? Why not some other engine?
It might be a case of it's just what I found first, but it's probably that, and because we just all decided on Unity for some reason when we did that big capstone project. So that's just what's stuck ever since. So first one wins, I guess.
Well, to be fair, I do think Unity is a fine engine. I played some really cool games, running on Unity. And I've actually, well, just a little bit about myself. I'm not a game developer, or at least I've never released anything to the public. But I do dabble now with some visual novel creation. And, I use an engine called RenPy. However, I've seen recently some visual novels utilize or built using Unity, and man, let me tell you, they look absolutely gorgeous. So I'm thinking maybe one of these days, perhaps I'm gonna have to take up Unity myself.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's like super like quote unquote easy to get into, but I mean, it's you'll eventually get absorbed into it, and then you'll just get used to it kind of fast, I guess. At least that's how it was for like me and my team at that time.
Now, I noticed that you mentioned some more people on your games page. They helped you with music, they helped you with art. Now, would you consider yourself a solo developer, or would you say you have a team?
Team is pretty hard to say because on that page, on that itch page at least, it's always recruit people for a jam, and then like disband or at least go very inactive in all of those projects immediately afterwards. Like we keep the servers up and everything, and maybe talk to each other about, hey, we did this post jam, but I guess there's no real canon team going on. We just kind of those are just happen to be the people that happen to be there that day.
And so you're an indie developer, and I guess maybe we could say, maybe perhaps you're kind of a solo indie developer. Those you do have a team to help you here and there. Now, what challenges do you think you faced as a solo indie developer or as a small team occasionally that maybe bigger developers or even other indie developers with larger teams don't have to deal with?
Well, minus Goat Hell, the other two projects were jam games that I led, and they were both on pretty short time spans with relatively small teams. So it was more a matter of finding a way for all of us to get all this done on time. Because like Horizon, for example, that was a 7-day game. Another shoot 'em up that I have that's not on the itch page, that was a 7-day game. That's like a 3-man team, and what Horizon had like I think a 4-man team, 4 or 5-man team, and then SpitFire recently. It was a 3-day thing with a 3-man team. So it was trying to juggle, trying to do things as fast as we could based off usually like a big to-do list.
I noticed all of your games, or most of your games, originated as Game Jam games. And could you explain for our listeners what a Game Jam is?
So a Game Jam is you get this time you get like this time period to build a game mostly from the ground up from the time specified, and usually it's based on a theme. So it's mostly like a sprint to bang out a concept within that week or so. Well, the time always varies, but within that time frame, bang out something within the theme if there's any, as best as you can. And then for all these jams, there were also rating periods. So just see how you stack up against everyone else that you competed with, and then you even get to play other people's games too while you're at it.
That does seem rather interesting. I actually was planning on competing in a game jam this year. Unfortunately, I had some health issues to flare up at the last minute. Found out I had to have my gallbladder removed. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to compete in it. But if you ever seen me around on Twitter, maybe you saw the name Rage Arc in my name. I was planning on competing in a game jam called Rage, Really Amateur Game Expo. Essentially, it's like shit posting, but you're making a game. Or the aim is to make the worst game imaginable, while still playable, while still enjoyable. If you know, like, if you're familiar with horrible movies, or movies that are so horrible they're good, like if you ever seen The Room, for example, it's kind of a similar concept.
So it's like almost like going for B movie quality. That's like there's a certain quality to it, quote unquote, but it's still enjoyable somehow.
It's amazing how that works. There's something I've been quite fascinated as somebody in the film, just how that works. Either your film is either good or it's so bad that it can be good as well. And there are quite a few movies like that, like Sharknado and such. Whereas, they're not bad, but they're not good. It kind of just fades off into obscurity, unfortunately. That's a really interesting concept. But I find it to be an American concept. I talk to people from other countries. They're like, what? Americans do that? So it's an interesting situation. But essentially, that's what it's like. It's like you try to make that B movie quality game, and it's meant to be enjoyable. It's meant to be, lighthearted and such.
It's like, don't take it too seriously and just have fun with it kind of thing.
Absolutely. And the guys who run it are really wonderful. They also run a major online convention every year called SAGE, Sonic Amateur Game Expo. They host Sonic hacks, Sonic fan games, and also indie games as well. So I always like to suggest it to my indie developer friends. If you got a game coming out or you have a game you want to show off, it's a really, really great place. So many people are drawn there because of Sonic, and they end up finding indie games that they fall in love with. And that was actually how I got into indie games myself.
Yeah, looking at their site now. It's pretty cool.
You've been at, I think, maybe 3 or 4 different game jams, at least from what I can tell. Now, out of all the game jams you participated in, which one do you think was the most difficult?
SpitFire, definitely. It was the short time span of that, having only 3 days compared to the 7 that I'm used to. Oh, and also, actually not the smallest team, it's more like tied for smallest team, but it was the short time span that really really made you go all the way to the wall.
I can imagine, playing Spitfire. I can see, and I will get to that in a bit, but I definitely can see how that's reflected in some of the gameplay choices, which I think were really solid choices to make in that situation. But before we jump into Spitfire, I want to talk a bit about some more about some of your earlier games. Um, Now, your first game, or the first game that you worked on, was Goat Hell, or at least the first game, I guess, besides your university project was Goat Hell, right?
In between those two, there was before Goat Hell, we had a. Actually, now that I think of it, this list is kind of out of order. Horizon came before Goat Hell, but before Horizon, we had I had another shoot 'em up, and then I also had another rhythm game before that as the first game, and that was the university project. Oh, and this the rhythm game was called Chord Crisis.
Goat Hell seems like a really interesting title to me. So I have to ask, what was the inspiration for that one?
This one I couldn't say. I wasn't really like heading this project. I was more just uh, do doing what everyone else wanted the whole time, really. And I think in the end, all I did was the some parts of not drawing the UI, but just coding the UI. So I didn't really have a huge hand in it. So it was more just watching other people's ideas unfold and then just acting on their will, really.
And did you take that? Was it something you enjoyed, or did you take it more like a learning experience, or how did you feel about that?
I thought it was a learning experience for like projects that I'm not heading. So it was a nice experience to. It was a well. First, the team was a lot bigger than average than all my other projects, and this was the first time we actually had more than one programmer on my team. Wow.
And now, do you prefer to be heading, or do you prefer to be a part of a team?
That I'm undecided on because I do like hearing other people's ideas, but if I end up heading the project, a lot of the things a lot of the ideas start getting pretty heavy-handed with not a lot of room for interpretation. So I should try more groups where I'm just tagging along.
No. One thing that really struck me before I had this conversation was your game Horizon. Now, on the surface, it seemed different, from your other games. Um, and actually, after seeing it in motion and after playing Spitfire, I can tell you that both they share the intensity. Um, but at least aesthetically and gameplay and genre-wise, they seem very different. And so, where did the inspiration for Horizon come from?
Horizon came from me wanting to adapt. Have you ever played the a mobile rhythm game called Citus?
I haven't, unfortunately. Can you tell me about
Can you
it?
tell me about it? Well, it's a game where rather than the notes coming down at you, the notes will just the notes appear, but instead of the notes moving around towards a point, you have a line moving across the screen telling you when to hit each note, and the line itself is moving around rather than the notes. So it's kind of like a reversed version of what you'd expect for like a scrolling rhythm game. But but the important part is this thing is only for touchscreens. And for Horizon, I wanted to try to adapt that to keyboard somehow. So that's what I ended up doing for that project.
Have you ever played any of the Guitar Hero games?
No, well, not Guitar Hero itself, but I used to play Rock Band 1 a long time ago, but only on guitar instead of any other instruments.
Yeah, that's kind of the first thing that kind of came to mind. I've never really tried it myself, but it looks interesting. Some of my friends who play guitar have actually told me that it's actually harder to play a game like that than it is to play a real guitar, um, which I find to be rather interesting. Um, Now, one thing, seeing the number of titles you have under your belt, I have to ask. I have to say, indie game developers are some of the most hardworking people, and yet some of the least appreciated. Many people sink, unthinkable amounts of time, money, and effort into developing games, and unfortunately, many never see a return. So I have to ask Crow, what keeps you coming back?
Well, randomly I'll just have. It's mostly just from playing other games and just thinking, what if I want to implement this myself somehow? Or if I just start randomly just like doodling on a whiteboard or scribbling stuff into a notebook or, well, more realistically, it's also if, hey, a game jam? Okay, I'll jump on it and just bang something out, possibly with one of the ideas I already had. And that's usually how the game starts spawning.
You know, I like that actually. I like that. I like how you take your inspiration. You wait for it to come to you, and then you roll with it. As opposed to trying to force yourself to put something out there. Now I don't see this. I've never seen this really in the indie community, but I have seen this with a lot of AAA games. Sometimes it seems like they put out games just to put out games, and there's no real inspiration behind it. It seems. And probably most notably would be like your big sports games, like your 2Ks and your Maddens. I'm not sure if that's even still a thing or not, but in the indie scene, it seems very different. It seems much like they wait for an idea to come to them, and bam, and they go with it. And as an artist myself, that's kind of how I try to be. I try not to force something. If something's there, I try to take it and run with it. But I try not to, force something that's not there. And because I believe, your audience can tell when you're into something and when you're not into something.
Yeah, I'd say the big difference is just like passion rather than banging out something like yearly just to rake in that usual yearly money.
Now I want to turn our attention, to the man of the hour, to the reason why we're all here, SpitFire Paradise. And what was your inspiration for SpitFire Paradise?
This game came from, well, it really originally, it's when I was like viewing upcoming jams one time, and then I saw this thing called a score jam coming up, and it was by this company named Squarespace, and they were hosting it. So I just thought, well, shoot 'em ups have scoring systems almost all the time, so let's. It's a nice excuse to make another shoot 'em up. But also, after that I started wanting to figure out something like how do I make a shoot 'em up that's gonna like something you can consume quickly and also not scare away people just because they're pretty brutal games, usually one hit death and all that. So something fast paced but also nice enough to not discourage people from playing. So things like those, you might have noticed like the infinite lives you have in the game, but that's also inspired from like other fast paced games. So around the time I was panning between a game called Choren Shah. It's a pretty old shooter, but it's a pretty fast paced game that makes use of like kind of limited resources really well. Another game called Raging Blasters that has like this 3-minute time attack mode, which is one of the pretty big inspirations for how I wanted to pace Spitfire. And then another game called Crimson Clover, which has its own time attack mode, which is also a 3-minute mode, where it's basically like you run around with infinite lives trying to score as high as possible in that period of time. And of course, the pace is also super fast in both Raging Blasters and Crimson Clover.
I can definitely feel that inspiration when I play SpitFire Paradise. I can definitely feel, it feels so intense. It feels very fast paced. And not only that, but you can really feel the weight of the timer. Um, and also, while you're trying to dodge the bullet, trying to keep your eye on the time, trying to, score as much as you can. So I can definitely feel that inspiration there, I would say. Um, Now, playing this, I have to ask: Are you a fan of any of the Are you a fan of any of the classic Sonic games? I ask because there's something about Spitfire Paradise that reminds me of a stage from a classic Sonic game. In particular, if you're familiar, it's called Sky Chase Zone from Sonic 2. I'm not sure if it's because they both take place in the sky, or maybe it's the movement of the some of the enemies. But are you familiar with that game?
No, I haven't played any of the classic Sonics. I've only played like a few stages of Mania.
So now, I wanted to ask. I think I kind of picked up on this, but I just want to make sure. Now, in regards to the gameplay, why did you go with a score-based approach as opposed to a more traditional linear-based game?
It's more to encourage like replay value. Like if the game were to like not encourage you to do anything interesting, like sit all the way back, like left of the screen, try not to get hit by anything, that wouldn't be very interesting for like what's going to bring you back. So that's where this was a requirement of the gem to have a leaderboard, but having the scoring system and leaderboard is there to encourage you to push yourself to climb said leaderboard. So just mainly for driving up the replay value somehow. But also the game's really short, so you can keep doing this really often.
You know, I really, that's one of the things I kind of picked up on there. I kind of picked up on, it'll bring you back. It'll keep bringing you back again and again and again. And that's one of the things I found while playing it. I'll be honest, I'm not the best when it comes to shoot 'em ups. But, it's something about you wanting to push yourself harder and harder and harder. And that keeps bringing me back, I would say. And also, I think it's a great design choice, especially considering your time limits. I mean, and not the game's time limits, but your jam's time limit. I figure it would save a lot of time but make it challenging and interesting as well. I would say. Um, and
Yeah, it was pretty convenient to have to make a very like bite-sized stage and then spend like the other 2.5 days making everything else work really. So I guess it kind of is an artifact of how short it is, but uh, games these like shooters that are this short, it's not like they're like crazy uncommon or anything, but they do exist as a thing. They are a thing that exists. They usually go under the name caravan shooters.
I have to look into that. I'm getting more into shoot 'em ups, even though I'm not very good at it. Um, so I'll have to look into caravan shooters. And I want to ask, where did the stage design come from? Or another question, or another way I can ask it was, how did you decide? Hey, let's set this in this particular location.
Uh, it was mostly first give the player some easy popcorn to kill. Like a lot of enemies you'll see are they only aim directly at you, maybe minus the bigger enemies that shoot like a few bullets like around you. But I basically wanted it to be a very like. Do you know the shoot 'em up concept streaming?
I'm not familiar with it. Can you
It's
explain
when
it?
you. It's like when you say there's like a huge like straight line of bullets coming at you, but they're all being aimed at you. So you dodge them by like like very rapidly tapping a move key in one direction. So you can. It's like hurting the bullets. You're like controlling where their enemies are shooting because you know how they behave already. So by moving in a very particular way, you kind of get screen control by forcing them to shoot in a very specific way like that.
Ah, oh wow. Actually, I'm not familiar with that, but that's something I am going to have to try. I'm going to have to try that. Um, which actually, this might be a great time to ask you this right here. Now, as the game developer, do you have any insider tips for our audience on how they could get a high score in SFP?
Uh, get up close to all your enemies because a lot of your points, you don't really start getting points until you start using your bombs. But you're not going to get bombs unless you kill enemies at close range for the most part, because the enemies will give you more items to use bombs if you kill them at close range. So that's one of the ways that I'm forcing the player to really get in there and just start killing things from like point blank.
I like that. I like that. You force them to get out of this safety zone. Many players who maybe play other shoot 'em ups when they first come to SpitFire Paradise, they are going to kind of hang back maybe a bit, kind of hang back and try to find like a safety zone or a comfort zone to kind of shoot from. Or at least that's what my first reaction was the very first time I played. And but you're forcing them to get in there and to get hard and heavy in the trenches, and so they can up their score. And I think that's a very unique play style, or at least from what I can tell, it's a very motivating style of play.
Yeah, and it actually has a bit of a how do you call it, like a knock-on effect, because if you're getting up close to enemies and killing them, that you're generally doing it fast, and if you kill enemies fast, you'll spawn extra enemies to make them drop even more items for you. So it's like kind of a snowball of making it might be a little harder on yourself to like keep spawning enemies like that, but because you're doing that, your scoring potential just keeps shooting up.
I know earlier you mentioned the time constraint was a bit difficult, and having a smaller team was difficult as well when it came to developing SpitFire Paradise. However, what do you think was the most difficult part for you in developing this game?
It was probably just getting the way the enemy spawner is, how to just working at all. Because for the longest time, I just had this lame placeholder spawner that just kind of spat out random enemies at you with no real rhyme or reason. But it wasn't until like I think 2/3 of the way that I actually put that part of the game in, so you could finish the game. Because for the longest time, it was just mostly you get to fly around and you shoot all the enemies that spawn, but the game never ends. So yeah, that 2-minute time limit was kind of there for. Oh, actually, it used to be 3 minutes, but that time limit was just there for show until the mechanic that ended the game showed up until about 2 days in.
Now, I want you to imagine for me. I want you to imagine that you were working on SpitFire Paradise outside of a game jam. Where you wouldn't have any constraints of time or any other regulations. How do you think SpitFire Paradise would have been different?
I probably would have, lengthened the usual time for every stage, so not 2 minutes, but the usual, like, quote-unquote standard is like 3 or 5 minutes for this type of game, so I probably would have tried to shoot for 3 minutes or something, and then I would have tried to make multiple stages rather than just this one stage that you dropped into.
Now, one of the things I find really impressive about your work is that you've made games of quite different genres. The genre of Horizon is quite disparate from that of SpitFire Paradise. And from this, I can tell you're a developer who loves trying new things, and you're not afraid to step outside of your comfort zone. Now, on the other hand, from your love of game jams, I can also learn that you love to challenge yourself, that you love to push yourself. But over the course of your career, have you learned anything about yourself?
Uh, well, Well, I learned that having like a looming timer over your head is definitely a really good motivator. So in the case of all these jam time limits, you're suddenly pushing yourself way harder than you're used to because there is literally a deadline to submit your stuff in a good state.
I feel like I'm the same way. I feel like I work better under pressure when I have a time limit as opposed to when I'm just okay given a project and say, okay, Michael, I want you to work on this. I want you to finish this for me. I feel like if that's the case, it might take me 6 months to finish something, but and it might not be my best. But if I'm given like a time limit, okay, Michael, I need you to have this on my desk by next week. It's going to I feel like I'm going to put more effort into it. I feel like I'm going to put some of my best work. I feel like I do work really well under pressure, and from based on what I know about you, it seems like you do as well.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy how it works as a motivator.
No. Again, I want to ask you another hypothetical situation, another hypothetical question. So let's imagine for a moment time and money was not an issue, and you'd have a team and a AAA sized budget. Let's say you had like a Nintendo sized budget, or Microsoft, or an EA sized budget. What kind of game would you like to make in that situation?
Well, the budget is a really huge part, so I'd probably either try to make like, Horizon has actually been seeing a bit of its own like post jam stuff. It just hasn't been released at all. But I'd really want to like really make Horizon's scope gigantic, a lot bigger, with like being able to license music or at least commission people to compose music for the game, because it is like the growth of that product is restricted by what kind of music I can actually get a hold of.
I can see that being a major hurdle. I can see that being a major hurdle. And so so if you could get any music into that game, what are some bands or what are some songs that you would like to have in it?
Pretty tough one. I mean, there's always like typical stuff. Like, I mean, really, really fun like cool bangers like Camellia stuff. But if I could like get like original stuff, that'd be great too. Like composed original stuff for the game, that'd be great.
And now, if there's anybody out there listening to us who would want to get into game development, or maybe there's somebody out there who would like to participate in their first game jam, what's some advice that you could offer them?
Well, depend if it's going to be a game jam. Don't overscope. So like, don't come up with this ginormous feature list that you're going to somehow accomplish in like 7 days, because you are going to run into hurdles along the way. So especially if it's like your first project, try to like make it something simple. So like the first jam I did was like the bullet hell jam. So if in that case, like a lot of people know what like bullet hell is, so it's thinking like, oh, just find a way to make your player work, find a way to make your bullet system work, boom, you have a game. And then if you want to keep adding to it based on whatever theme they gave you, and then add to it what you can realistically do within that time limit, but don't try to like have this super ambitious project that you definitely wouldn't be able to realistically complete in that short time.
And lastly, I'd like to ask, what does the future look like for Rolling Crow? Do you plan to participate in any more game jams, or perhaps would you like to develop a non-game jam game one day?
Yeah, I'd like to either keep working on Horizon, or actually at the moment I'm creating one more post jam update for SpitFire that adds another stage. But after that, I either want to get back to working on Horizon, or Well, I guess just start drafting up ideas for whatever the next game is. Probably another shoot 'em up.
Now, do you have any questions for me or anything you'd like to add?
Uh, what projects like other games have you been involved in, like any sort of capacity?
Honestly, as far as development goes, I haven't really done too much. I've only been working. I was working back in 2019, 2000, or first part 2020 on a visual novel. And unfortunately, I woke up to go to work one morning and I found out that my hard drive completely just crashed and I lost everything. Everything except for the script and, um, you know, I still have. I still have like what I have so far or what I had made so far. As like a playable game. But as far as my assets, I completely lost it all. But I only used free assets or Creative Commons assets, so I was able to go back and kind of to kind of recollect everything. But honestly, it kind of happened the same time as a certain global problem was going on. I'm not trying to piss off my YouTube overlords by mentioning what that was, but so I went like 6 months without a hard drive on my computer, and maybe it sounds a bit crazy, but I'm a Linux user, and so I was using Ubuntu off of a USB drive, and it worked really well, for my daily stuff, for my work, and all of that. But I couldn't really get into anything too heavy that would take a lot of memory because I just had like 32 gigs to work with off my USB drive, and so I kind of put that on the back burner. And then honestly, I kind of juggle free plus jobs, and so I kind of fell off of it, and then I actually got back into it around this summer, and then I got into making content for YouTube and VTubing and stuff. And so it's still something I like to come back to one day. It's still something I really do want to come back to one day, once I can catch a breather. But at the moment, I haven't really worked on anything officially.
Well, it's nice that you're able to at least do things like this in the meantime. So at least you like it.
I absolutely love it. It gives me the opportunity to meet amazing people such as yourself. I love meeting people. I love having conversations because I believe as individuals we all have our own story to tell. We all have our own perspective on things, and you can talk to, I think, all 7 billion plus people in the world, and you'll never hear the same exact story twice. And one of the reasons why, that's one of the reasons why I kind of ask some of the same questions to my guests when they come here, is because all my game developer guests and even some of my VTuber guests, I always ask, what's your first game? What's your favorite game? And maybe that sounds a bit repetitive, but I always know I'm gonna get a different answer when I ask that question. And I find it to be really exhilarating. I love this. Just something else about myself. Back from high school until I was in university, I was really big into filmmaking, and so this right here is kind of. I kind of gave up on it when I was in university because once I was done with university, I had to return home to a very small rural town in North Carolina, and making a low or no budget movie is much like making a low or no budget game. You have to take stock of what's around you, or what you can access freely, and whatever story you're gonna make it around that. And when you're on a university campus, and you have so many people around you, you can draw upon. But man, that's what I did when I was in university. But once I went home, I kind of, I didn't have access to really none of that stuff, and so I was like, okay, we're gonna put this up on the shelf for a while, and then around, I'd say maybe 2011, 2012, I started getting really into YouTube. And I started watching some amazing YouTubers like Yuri of Wen, Some Ordinary Gamers. Um, you know, I think her name, I can't remember her name, but she was a PokeTuber, really phenomenal YouTuber, and also game theory as well. And so that kind of really sparked my interest to kind of get back into it. And off and on, I kind of played around with the idea, and then finally, around 2021, I you know every year when Sage happens, I like to come back to Twitter, and I when I came back to Twitter, I saw so many VTubers. It's not just a thing for elite people like Project Melody or the Hollow Live girls, but it's something that ordinary people like you and I can do. So I was like, you know what? I'm gonna try my hand at this. This is gonna be, for lack of a better term, my filmmaking redemption arc, so to speak. And so that's kind of how I got into this, and why I enjoy it so much. And can I ask, what's your experience like, Ben? I'm sorry. What's your experience? What has your experience been like in the indie game community? What do you think so far?
Well, I mean, I don't really directly interact with them too much. I might be like in a few servers full of like devs, but I'm not with like any sort of servers full of other players. Really, it's mostly just other devs like giving out their opinions, or I'm giving my opinions to them, that kind of thing. So it's nice watching other people's projects go from like one point to another, though I don't really get to see too much like player feedback or anything. Mostly like dev feedback.
One of the things I actually really like about it is just the overall feeling. Like, I've only been in the dev community, or been interacting with the dev community, I should say, since about late August, early September, and from what I can tell, it seems like an overall very positive place. It would probably be no exaggeration to probably say one of the most positive communities online. And if you're familiar with online communities, that's probably saying a lot. But it's something that I really feel, and I really feel like these people are, they're legit. They're legit, good people. When I first heard about indie devs, my first reaction was going to be like, oh, somebody's gonna post a game, and then there's gonna be hundreds of comments, just like maybe harassing the person, talking about how horrible their game is, and stuff like that. And so I I was actually really surprised to find that that not be the case. There are people that, in the community that are very uplifting, and they tend, they'll give positive feedback, or they'll give positive feedback, or they'll try to be as uplifting as they can. They'll share a project, or if you need help, if they can't help you, then it's likely that they know someone who can help you, or who can give you advice if they themselves can't.
Yeah, it's pretty diverse set of responses that you can get just either just asking around or just shilling your own work, and then you just suddenly just get a truckload of responses saying all sorts of things. That's nice.
And outside of gaming, do you have any other hobbies? Like maybe movies or series, or comics or anime or anything like that?
I do have not really like too heavy in like reading or keeping up with any sort of manga or anime. But I mean, it's there, just not too prominent. It's usually just if it's a hobby, it's usually gaming related instead.
I used to go through cycles with that as well. Like, there would be times during my year where like every night I'd watch an episode, at least one episode of an anime, and then maybe go several months where I don't watch anything at all. Actually, rather similarly, up until recently, up until I started this whole venture, gaming was like that for me as well. Maybe they would be like maybe maybe 2 or 3 months. I may go and not pick up a controller, or if I do play it, maybe just an hour or so on the weekend. But now it's like an everyday thing, and so I find myself to be like that now with a lot of anime and a lot of series. Un, unfortunately, unfortunately, I really can't really see my that situation getting any better now that I'm a content creator. I know it sounds kind of ironic, I would say. I got into content creation because I love anime. I love VTubers. I love games. I love American animation and stuff. But but since I got into content creation, actually, well, with the exception of games, I consume very little now of the other content.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy how that ends up turning out. It's just like, would you not really say that you're becoming it, but you do suddenly consume a lot less of it for some reason now.
And I'm not sure if it's just for people like us. I'm not sure if like authors do the same thing as well. Um, when it comes to reading books and writing and such. But it's something interesting. It's something interesting. But I'm hoping that'll change a bit as I once I get into my stride, and I start getting into this routine a bit more. Um, and one more thing I want to ask before we end this, and this is something I think even though I'm a YouTuber, hopefully one day VTuber, and you're a game developer, one common thing we both share is using social media to promote ourselves. Interacting with our fans, trying to get us more attention. Um, and what's that been like for you?
Personally, it's been very. Uh, it depends on what the content is. So if I see a game I'm like super legitimately interested in, it's you might like see all the random shoot 'em ups I've been retweeting at times. And then yeah, I'm like crazy invested. I want to see what happens next. I want to see it get released. But if it's for things like Screenshot Saturday and all that, it feels very dry and automated, very very fire and forget because you put it there just to boost yourself, and then for the most part, I don't see a lot of projects I'm interested in usually, and then you end up seeing all of the same projects in all those similar threads because everyone else is doing the same thing as yourself. So all the projects I find interesting are usually the ones outside of those kinds of threads. So yeah, that's all of those projects are the exciting parts. Everything else is a little bit robotic.
Honestly, I wish I had some solid advice I could give here, but honestly, for me, where I'm at now, and I don't think I'm big at all by any stretch of the imagination, but wherever I'm at now, it was just by chance, by just me being in the right place at the right time, or tweeting out the right stuff at the right time and having the right people see it. Like I happened to come across this Linux-based game, or not a Linux-based game, I'm sorry, but this game that was for Windows and Linux. And so I happened to tweet it out, or retweet it. I would say, you know what, this guy, he did, he made his game Linux compatible, and as somebody in the Linux community, we are really, we are really, we really love when you guys make games for us, for our systems as well, as opposed, in addition to Windows and Mac. So we really love it. And so I tweeted that out, and it caught the guy's attention, and he said, "Oh, would you want to maybe play my game and test it out and stuff, and send it to me?" And he sent me a free Steam copy, and that's kind of how I got where I am today. So it's just kind of being in the right place at the right time, and also networking, trying to meet other people and such. But yeah, so it's no really. Unfortunately, I don't really have like a grand strategy, or okay, this worked for me, so if you can try this will help you grow as well.
Yeah, it definitely is. It feels like luck, but for now, I just try not to think too hard about it. I just shell it out, and if people like it, they like it. It's great.
And that's one of the things I really respect about any content creator. If you put out what you want to put out, I think that's it's much more respectable, as opposed to just trying to chase clout, or God forbid somebody try to stir up drama. I would say. And if you follow my page very closely, that's kind of how I try to do. Maybe I'll put out a meme and maybe we'll get zero interaction, but it's something I find funny, so I do it. I'm kind of a weird person in that regards, but that's another story for another day. Well, I don't want to keep you too long, so if you don't have any more questions or anything to add, we can end it here. And so before we go, though, I want to thank you so much, Crow, for joining us today, and also on behalf of the Linux community, thank you for making a Linux version of your game. We really love it when developers support us by making their games playable on our operating systems.
No problem. I do wish I'd be able to more thoroughly test it, though, because you do get the option to build it, but I don't really have any ways of really putting it under fire, maybe except play it in a VM for a few minutes. But I don't have this dedicated Linux install just kind of in my pocket or anything. So it's more of if it works, that's great. Otherwise I'll just have to. I haven't had any Linux or Mac related problems yet from any of these builds, so I guess we'll just cross that bridge when we get there.
Yeah, in the future, if you ever need any projects tested on Linux, please feel free to shoot me a DM. I couldn't look under the hood or anything like that, but as far as actual gameplay, I could definitely give it a shot. And I'm one of those players. I kind of like to push the game to the limit. I try to do things that maybe you shouldn't do with the game, like maybe, for example, if it's a racing game, go off the track and try to go as far as the boundary will let you. So I do like pushing games to the limit in that regards. So if you ever in the future you like some help with some Linux testing, I'd love to help you.
Thanks. And yes, testing is very unappreciated. It's how many times have I seen in jams things seeing the message of it probably works, or I didn't really test it, but here it is. It's nice to have people just get in there and break your game, because you get a perspective that you wouldn't really do yourself, because it's dev blindness.
All right, and yeah, so this in the future, please hit me up if you need it. And all right, guys, gals, and non-binary pals, thank you so much for joining us as well. Be sure to check out Goat Hell, Horizon, and SpitFire Paradise, all free-to-play games at the link below. Also, special thanks to Fran, who does a wonderful job doing my art. A special thanks to all of my friends on Twitter. I wouldn't be here without you all. And most importantly, a special thank you to all of you for watching. Please like this video if you liked it. Dislike it if you dislike it. Feel free to comment below and let me know what you think. And if you like my content, please subscribe and turn your notifications on. Until next time, fam, peace out.